The China boom is over and Beijing is making it worse. So says the Wall Street Journal in an article detailing how Beijing took the free market miracle it inherited, one that took China decades to build, and ran it into the ground. So far this year, Chinese manufacturing has crashed with mass layoffs and falling prices, while housing is essentially frozen, as borrowers fear that trillion-dollar property developers will go bankrupt. Now, together, manufacturing and housing make up almost half the Chinese economy, much more than in the US, leaving the rest of China's economy limping. I mentioned in recent videos how China screwed the pooch. In short, their paranoid President Xi cracked down on private businesses, who he saw as a political threat. He even temporarily disappeared Jack Ma, founder of Alibaba and the Chinese version of Steve Jobs, the guy MBA students put on a poster on their dorm. This anti-business stance is in sharp contrast to the previous strategy of go fast or growth at any cost. It's the main reason why China has slowed under Xi, taking annual growth from the double digits of the previous decades to just 5% under Xi, which is about typical for a poor country. By the way, Chinese stocks have gone literally nowhere in 15 years, giving Japan a run for the money in terms of lost decades. Now, to make up for slowing growth, Beijing then poured trillions of cheap money into favored sectors, namely housing and manufacturing, above all, green tech. To illustrate what this flood of money did, China now makes approximately 30 times more solar panels than the US and Europe combined. At one point, there were roughly 500 electric vehicle car makers in China. By the way, roughly 400 of those have now failed, leaving forests of abandoned EVs littering the Chinese countryside, what Bloomberg calls, quote, EV graveyards. In housing, of course, the ghost cities are world famous. Entire cities built at enormous expense with nobody living there, slowly crumbling in the desert sun. There had been hope for the annual People's Congress this week, where the premier was expected to announce new stimulus. Alas, hopes were dashed as Beijing remains a deer frozen in the headlight, praying that more manufacturers and developers and their banks don't crash. For background, China's sitting on roughly $50 trillion in non-financial debt, which tripled in 10 years. Much of that is in those companies that Beijing was feeding free money into. At this point, they're on the edge, facing rising debt costs as old cheap debt rolls over into new expensive debt. So what's next? Brought to you by Unchained.com. Unless Beijing changes path, which is unlikely under the famously stubborn Xi, China could see rising domestic unrest from millions of angry, jobless Chinese, and potentially more foreign adventurers to distract that population. Last year, China's youth unemployment hit 20.4%. Official or unofficial estimates actually put it closer to 50%, according to the South China Morning Post. And then the government ominously stopped publishing statistics. So Beijing is very much aware of the problem and could well reach for that age-old tonic to domestic discontent, war. As for America, China's collapse won't stop Beijing's efforts to destabilize our country. What it will do is launch a tidal wave of cheap imports as Chinese overproduction is dumped abroad. That would delight American consumers and reduce inflation in the short run. In the long run, it wipes out what's left of America's dying manufacturers, meaning our final import from China could be a Rust Belt. Okay, we'll be watching. See you next time.